Good afternoon and welcome. We are here to talk about trauma and trauma support citywide, and in terms of what it means to be able to identify trauma and to be able to recognize when we are on the other side of trauma. Well, we have a great group that you will meet in a few moments. I am happy to say that this webinar is sponsored by Thrive NYC. And without further ado, I'm going to ask for the director if she would come forward, Susan Herman, and bring words.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Wyatt. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for being here. And I thank all the panelists in advance. Thrive partners with 13 city agencies and nearly 200 community-based organizations to try and fill critical gaps in mental health care. We are not an alternative healthcare system or a mental health care system. We're here to try and have as many people as possible access support and mental health care. So a lot of the work that we do is partner with people who are already providing some kind of support in their communities, whether it's people who provide social services or employers that want to have a workplace that promotes mental health. And in this case, faith leaders who are already people that congregations turn to when they need support and care. This webinar actually was inspired by people from the 67th Precinct Clergy Council who said, we're already serving our community in times of trauma, but we want to understand the dynamics of trauma better. And so we're here today to talk about trauma, its effects on physical and mental health, and how to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma and what we know about what works. We hope this will provide you with some new information about trauma and practices that you can use as you protect your own mental health and enhance your support of your congregations. Thank you for joining us today, and I send it back to Reverend Dr. Wyatt.
Thank you, Susan. And as we move on through our engineer on the trauma train, if you will, is one that is known throughout the country and indeed around the world. I met him before he became famous. He was my professor at New York Theological Seminary. And I am honored, happy, overjoyed that he is our didactic leader as it relates to talking about trauma. He is a professor at New Brunswick Theological Seminary, Willard Ashley, Dr. Ashley, and he's also pastor of a church in Jersey City. So without further ado, allow me to present to some and introduce to others our leader for this part of the journey, Reverend Dr. Willard Ashley Sr. Dr. Ashley, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm glad to be part of this project. And I thank all those involved in New York Thrive for this opportunity to share and to be together and to have a heart-to-heart, real conversation. So I want to begin by making something very clear. I'm not an import. I'm a native New Yorker. I change my clothes in Teaneck, New Jersey, but I do my living in New York City. My family is New York. We're New York through and through, educated, New York City public school system, Fashion Institute of Technology, all those kind of things. So if I'm sharing not as somebody that came from out of town, flying by, flying through, but as one New Yorker to another. You can tell by the way I pronounce certain words already. He's from New York. Okay, we got it. I bleed blue, but I'm not a Crip. I'm a New York Yankees fan. My famous cousin was Jackie Robinson from Brooklyn Dodgers, so blue runs through my veins. And I'm glad to be able to talk with you, to share from the clergy, psychotherapists, professor, all those kind of things, This is the day the Lord has made, and we shall rejoice and be glad in it. Let's go to the next slide. It seems almost impossible if you have a pulse not to be traumatized. Regardless whether you're red, blue, purple state, however you voted, whatever your political persuasion may be, we're living in the midst of a pandemic. We're living in the midst of all the other things going on in the world. And so trauma goes back to the Greek word 17th century meaning wound. And many of us that went to seminary or we are well read from Henry Nouwen's book, The Wounded Healer. We're wounded, but we're healers. And trauma is dealing with a disturbing and distressing experience. It's hard to have lived this last year and not say you've been disturbed or distressed and had that as a part of your experience. It's an emotional shock following a stressful event or physical injury, which may be associated with physical shock and sometimes leads to long-term neuroses and post-traumatic stress disorder. Confession, I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I didn't serve overseas in the military. I grew up in Harlem. And in time when I grew up in Harlem, when you heard loud noises, somebody was getting shot. And so now I hear a loud noise, a car backfire, and I automatically take cover. And sometimes it's very embarrassing. Sometimes just, it is what it is and you live with it. But that's part of me experiencing things that were distressing and disturbing. And so we have a psychological, physiological response. And it can be caused by exposure to racism, violence, economic insecurity, abuse, grief, and other negative life events. Next slide. And so psychological trauma causes damage to a person's mind due to one or more distressing events, causing overwhelming amounts of stress that exceed a person's ability to cope and can eventually lead to serious long-term negative consequences. And I always put a pin right there because sometimes in my psychoanalytic world and mental health, we're too quick to pathologize. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But right now, short of being suicidal or homicidal, it's a little premature to begin to pathologize people. Next slide. And why do you say that? I'm glad you asked that. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's producing other traumas. We're dealing with racial trauma or racialized trauma. And we've been saying that quote unquote microaggressions are not so micro if you're on the other end of it. We're looking at congregational trauma. Our congregations are traumatized. The people in our congregations, between losing loved ones, the anxiety of vaccination, tracing, all the above, is created congregational trauma. You can't go back to your building. When you do go back to your building, it looks different. Things are different. And then there's clergy trauma, if you will. We had to do one too many homegoings online. We're doing worship online. If we're not online and we are in the building, then we have anxiety about being open. And what will that look like? What does it feel like? If you have a large mortgage to pay, you're going through I hope I can make the mortgage payments. And let's be honest and transparent. We have community trauma. It's not just our own little place. Our community or communities are traumatized. Next slide. So, Dr. Phyllis Harrison Ross is considered the mother of Black psychiatry. She was church-going, grew up in Detroit, made her way over to New York metro area. She was commissioner of corrections under 5 different governors. And she would say, there's nothing wrong with you. That's a different approach. There's nothing wrong with you. What has happened to you is wrong. Let's talk about it. So let's talk about it. Let's look at the next slide and talk about it. So what are the signs and symptoms of trauma? And if you check any of these boxes, don't panic. These are common, normal responses to what we've experienced over the last year, if not longer. And you have trouble focusing. So as a professor, I'm saying to my students, okay, if you get the paper in late, I'm not going to ding you. It's okay, because we're all having a hard time focusing. You have a hard time trying to write it. I have a hard time trying to read it. So we're both in the same boat. So let's be kind to each other. You have feelings that interfere with daily life and they become unmanageable. And so the obvious sometimes isn't so obvious, or it's like walking through quicksand as if you were depressed. You have feelings of hopelessness and helplessness. And we have all seen one killing, one shooting too many. And we want to be hopeful, but sometimes we just throw up our hands like, oh my God, when's the shoe going to drop again? And there's a sense of loss of control. You couldn't just go into your building because you wanted to. You had to respond. Certain places were closed or they had to make curfew. And so we're not totally in control. I can't just go to my favorite restaurant because I want to, because there's only room or only capacity for X amount of people. And if we're honest, and it's okay, we have anger management issues and we're irritable. And if you don't believe it, ask your closest friends and family that's with you. They will say amen to that. Please, are you listening to what he said? And it's they're common responses. And we have these periods so we have an avoidance of family and friends. I mean, I'm an introvert, so like, okay, you're in the room by yourself with your books. What was the bad part? But but that being said, sometimes we just need to be by ourselves. We don't want to be around other people. And clearly, all of us are in this place of being hyper vigilant. The tenor of the times calls us to be such. But when you're traumatized, you're also hypervigilant. We mentioned before post-traumatic stress disorder, and that there's a persistent negative thought. And we have mood changes or mood swings, depending on which terminology you prefer. And there's chronic stress. I mean, I'll trade your list with my list. We can trade lists together, but all of us are stressed out. Am I in the right building? And so it's not like, okay, I checked this box and no more stress. No, we're all stressed out. It's almost like a punchline when my internist says, hey, Will, reduce your stress. Like, really? Let's think about that, okay? So we're under stress. And then we have unhealthy eating, or in some cases, the misuse of substances. Mine is unhealthy eating. Oreo cookies don't last long in our household. Give me a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and some Oreos, turn your back, and they're gone. And so we all have these kind of challenges, if you will. Next slide. And so how can you support people who have experienced trauma? Whether you're a clergy person, your other profession, or you're just in the home and you want to be supportive. Everyone's asking this question. So here it is. We want to enhance protective factors. We want to use trauma-informed practices and care for yourself to support others. So let's break that open and see what does that look like. Next slide. So to enhance protective factors, it begins with healthy habits. If I was in church, I'd say, everybody say healthy habits, but I'm not in church, so just say it to yourself, healthy habits. And that you have positive self-esteem. And sometimes that's easier said than done, understood, but to work at it and to have a sense of identity. That's a whole webinar right there talking about identity, or as we say in the mental health, identities. But to have a sense of your identity. You're more than just this one identity. All of us have multiple identities: husband, wife, partner, aunt, uncle. I mean, in our professional, you name it. So to have a sense of that. to really major and master problem solving and coping skills. And those of us that make it, quote unquote, and get through this, we figured out how to do problem solving, how to cope. And it's a moving target. What helped me to cope today may be something totally different tomorrow. And so to be aware of that, to have supportive relationships with friends, caregivers, and community. You cannot get through this doing it all by yourself. Give you a moment to think about that. You need supportive relationships. You need cheerleaders, if you will. You need people that can say, you can do this. Yes, you can make it. Supportive relationships. And you need access to support services. I know that you'll receive lots of different access to different services, resources that are available. Read them, make them help you get through this. And we need spiritual, and I say and intellectual engagement. Not just read the Bible, not just read sacred literature because you have to prepare a sermon or prepare a message, but use it for your own nourishment and read some things that will challenge you intellectually. Next slide. And so you use trauma-informed practices. What does that look like? I'm glad you asked that. You have to ensure your physical and emotional safety. And again, we see the headlines. We know what's going on in the world. Sometimes it feels easier said than done. We do the things that we believe will help us to ensure our physical and emotional safety to the best of our ability. And in doing so, we build social networks, particularly intergenerational relationships. I'm in my mid 60s. I used to be a DJ. If you ask me now what's the top 10 on the R&B chart, I'll go, I have no clue. But if I ask my teenagers, they rattle it off and tell me, look at me like, you used to be a DJ, Dad. What happened? Where'd you go? The same way, if you take a look at your telephone, look at your smartphone. I always say my smartphone is smarter than I am. But you give it to a 6-year-old and they make you feel really dumb because they can do things on your smartphone that you didn't even know existed. You need intergenerational relationships. It keeps us young. Amen, amen, amen. To strengthen social norms that encourage healthy behaviors. So if I talk to people that I know eat healthy, just being around them, I feel guilty and I'll start eating the lettuce and the salad instead of the other stuff that I would prefer. Amen. And so be around people that strengthen those social norms that encourage healthy behaviors. When I'm around certain people, I say, okay, fine, I put on my sneakers, we'll go walk around the park several times. I need the walk, it's good for my heart. Got it. Okay, fine. To organize community collaboration and share decision making. It's important that we take responsibility for our community. Amen, lights. And that in so doing, that we share in decision making. You can't ask somebody else to do what you don't want to do for your own community. Amen. And to offer opportunities for empowerment and for skill building. So most of us that are clergy or have been having to do Zoom for the last year, we have earned our PhD in Zoom. We know Zoom backwards and forwards, know the little nooks and crannies. And by the way, they just gave us a new download before we started. So they have to do some more research or new studying. But what are the things that you've learned? What are you learning? What are those skills? And then to promote a sense of community belonging. That's another whole lecture, webinar for another day. But to have a sense of who are your neighbors, know your neighbors. Be part of a community, not just have a place where you rent or you buy, you have a home and you change clothes, but know the people that you work with that live in your neighborhood. Amen. Next slide. And so caring for yourself to support others. Caring for yourself to support others. Breathe. Did I mention that? Breathe. Carve out 5 or 10 minutes to meditate or pray. And maybe I should put a comma, daily. Not just once a week, once a month. I did it, but no, every day spend time to meditate or to pray. Ground yourself in the present moment. You'll see me one day and we'll talk about your past on the analyst couch, but in the moment, just be present with the moment. Be present with the moment. Acknowledge your concerns and help them to engage your fears. You know, sometimes as religious leaders in other places of leadership, we don't want to own our concerns and we don't want to talk about our fears. All of us have concerns. All of us have fears. You may not want to tell everybody what they are, but you have to at least be honest with yourself and acknowledge these are your fears and concerns. Remember, this is very important. Remember, you're not alone. We're not doing Elijah complex. Nobody but me knows what the troubles I see. No, you're not alone. And to reach out for support. Believe it or not, in the largest city in the United States of America, there is support. There are people that want to be supportive of you, but they have to know that you need their help. So reach out for support and create and sustain community. And again, this is an introvert talking to you saying create and sustain community. It's life-giving, it's life-changing. And to show up for one another, to listen, but notice the difference, compassionately, and practice empathy. If that was your parent, if that was your grandparent or your child, how would you want them to be treated? And sometimes, more than others these days, you have to turn off the media. Hello? And just unplug. It's like during 9/11, some of us that were caregivers got sick because we'd come home and watch the buildings fall. We would sit behind our desk and hear people talk about it all day. We didn't have enough sense to unplug. So I'm saying unplug because your body can only take but so much toxicity. And to stay healthy through regular sleep, diet, exercise, and hydration. Water is your best friend. Amen. And to practice gratitude. Hey, the older I get, the more easy it is to practice gratitude. I woke up in the morning, that's a thank you, thank you, thank you. I have a minimum amount of pain in my joints. That's thank you, thank you. There's food, I have choice of what to eat. So to practice there are a lot of things in the world I don't like, I want to help change, but a lot of things I can say thank you and share and show appreciation. Amen. And so what are the takeaways? Trauma is a natural stress response to a negative life event. We're not going to traumatize you quite yet. If it has long-term effects, then we start looking at pathologies, if you will, but not yet. Faith leaders can address trauma in communities by prioritizing physical and psychological safety, fostering social connections, and encouraging people to seek mental health support. It's there, it's available. And again, you are not alone. Help is available. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Ashley. I appreciate it. One of the reminders that you got a little hand clap there. One of the reminders of Zoom is to take yourself off mute. And how many times have we either felt muted or are muted to our own issues and concerns? So now we have a time for you. If there's a question that you want to direct to Dr. Ashley, we've got a few minutes to do that, and then we will go to our illustrious panel that will come in with their lived and life experience. So we're opened up for any questions for Dr. Ashley.
And Dr. White, if I could interject this to Dr. Rich, um, on the Zoom, we do have LIU Brooklyn students that are in a stress management course, and our course meets at this same time. So I am definitely looking for some of those scholars to pose some questions to Dr. White, to Dr. Ashley at this time. And we also have the Vice President of the North American Association of Social Workers, Dr. Brown here, and also our Editor-in-Chief. So if they want to chime in as well, so they're my special guests. And so scholars, here's your opportunity to engage with folks beyond just me in the classroom setting.
All right, and remember, Professor Telvis is watching. And since you took that opportunity, I want to say hi to my colleagues from the Greater Allen Cathedral that's on the line, my AME colleagues, Kim Anderson, who's been with us on the last call and who has done a lot through Metropolitan AME Church in Harlem.
Okay.
Dr. Pat Riley. All right, I'm gonna get in trouble. And Brody,
I hear you now.
I see you, Brody, and I see there go my girl over there. All right, so with that said, this is family. And I think part of what we have the opportunity, we don't have to ask permission to be family one to the other. I think that counts for something. All right, it's opened up. It's opened up. And Sophie will help me navigate. So Sophie, your job title has not changed in this webinar.
Hi, everybody. So please feel free to raise your hand using the reactions function at the bottom of the Zoom. If you click reactions, you can raise your hand. You can also type your question in the chat. You can do so anonymously, just to me, if you prefer to have a little, just something on the more discreet, or you can just unmute yourself, so don't be shy.
Maybe I'll start us off with a question. Dr. Ashley, there's some research that's been done that shows that people who don't feel safe in their neighborhoods, who don't feel like the place that they live every day, going to and from, is safe, are much more likely to experience serious psychological distress than people who feel that their neighborhood is safe. I wonder if you could talk to all these faith leaders and students who are gathered here about when you have that awareness about someone, how you might work that into your support for them.
Thank you. It's a great question. And I cheated. I was working on that question because I have to do a lecture for Rutgers School of Social Work on Saturday. So I know that was going to come up. So thank you. So I can test it now. So it's a very good question. And particularly during this time frame, Black, Asian, brown people are not feeling safe in their own neighborhoods. I'm 6'2", 200 something pounds. And given all that's going on in the world, I don't always feel safe, because you can check all the boxes and still, as we've seen, not be in a safe position, in a safe place. So one of the things, as I said earlier, is to own how you feel. Don't deny it. Own the fear, own the anxiety, whatever it may be. Secondarily, to look at what you can do to be as safe as possible. Nothing's going to be 100%. We see that. We know that now. And so to be as safe as possible, don't do things that you know would be considered quote unquote risky behavior. Don't do things that will invite or give permission to say, oh, this isn't done, et cetera, et cetera. And if you think about it, you're living in New York metropolitan area, you already have a sense of third eye, if you will. I fight with my mental health people all the time. Growing up in New York, you've been deputized as mental health care providers because you have to have a keen eye. You see 6 kids walking toward you. Are they just kids having fun, or is it gang initiation night and you're in deep trouble? So utilize that sense. You have it. It's there. Activate it.
Thanks, Dr. Ashley. A question from the chat. How should faith leaders prepare for members returning to in-person services that are expressing anxieties/trauma in the midst of the pandemic?
And everyone's different. So Dr. Wyatt knows that I'm certifiable, even though I might be a psychoanalyst, and so I say and do some things that are a little different than what you may say and do in your congregation. But I'm very transparent with my congregation. And I share, these things concern me. These are things that I have fears that woulda, coulda, may happen. And at some point, I say, the door is open. Feel free to come and let's talk about it. And I get it. My name's on the marquee. I get to make the decision. I get the big bucks, quote unquote, wink, wink. So we're going to open or not open. That's not open for discussion. That part is not a democracy. And why do you say that? Because I'm concerned about what my attorney says makes sense, what the insurance company is going to cover. And I always have this notion that, God forbid, if I open against my will of what I thought I wanted to do, someone gets sick, can I look in the mirror and live with it? Can you live with it?
Another question from the chat, Dr. Ashley. Does a traumatic reaction necessitate a specific major traumatic experience, or might it be the result of numerous micro traumatic experiences in the aggregate over time?
There is such a thing as a cumulative effect, and my colleagues will speak more eloquently to that part of it than I can right now. But yes, you have a cumulative effect. We do know that when they did the search, when they did the autopsy on Dr. Martin Luther King, that he had a heart that was twice his age because of all this stress and trauma he had exposed his body to. So yes, and you see these little free tests now. How does your age match what your body says and so forth. So yes, if you're constantly exposed to traumatic events, it can age you.
Thank you. Ms. Gambler, please go ahead with your question.
Hi, thank you. It's a question and a statement. Somebody just mentioned owning your fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a member of a new group, well, it's a few years old, a group called Concerned Citizens of Downtown Jamaica.
Okay.
One of our issues is the homeless population that just seems to be roaming the streets. And we have an oversaturation of shelters in this area. We met this morning, and one of the things that keeps coming up is the fact that there are many people out in the streets, homeless or what have you, who have mental health challenges. And it makes people feel fear because you don't know who you're running into. You don't know from minute to minute what may accost you, for want of a better word. So my comment or question is twofold. One, what mental health services can be available or is available? We're a group of local politicians, residents in the community, business owners, and service providers.
Okay.
So we're in a dilemma. I'm sorry to drag it on, but the question I think is really, what can we do to help these people that will help ourselves at the same time? And the next thing is probably for Susan Herman to let us know if there's somebody who can join our group and represent mental health services.
I'm going to formalize what you just did. And
please and thank you.
I'm going to move that question to Susan and the second part in terms of a response, because that is more of a governmental function. And we may have opinions on it, but opinions may not change what you're facing. Susan, do you have any comment to that?
Yes, I'm happy to try and respond. Let me try and address what you raised and let me know if I did. When you see people in the community who you believe are homeless and need assistance, They may or may not have mental health problems, as you said, but you believe they're homeless. You have good reason to believe they're homeless and they need assistance. We're urging people to call 311 because there are homeless outreach teams that the Department of Homeless Services manages that can come to the location. And those teams have not only social workers, sometimes they come with nurses, sometimes with psychologists or psychiatrists, sometimes with peers. They can assess what the person's needs are and try and coax them to come in from the streets. And as you know, sometimes it takes many attempts, but they will do that. Once they've identified somebody, they will try over and over and over again. If it's somebody that you know, or someone that you care about and someone has told you about it, and you know that someone has mental health challenges and they're in a fixed location, we encourage you to call NYC Well, 188-NYC Well. They have mobile crisis teams that within a couple of hours, that's why we want to know that someone's in a fixed location, they can come out and also assess the situation and try and connect people to services. So if you believe someone is homeless, always call 311, describe the situation. The outreach teams will try and find someone. If they're moving around a small area, they will try and find them. If you believe someone has a mental health problem and they are housed, call NYC Well, and they will try and go to the location and assess. Does that address your concerns?
It does and it doesn't, because a lot of these people are residents of the shelters in this area, but they don't have anything to do all day. So they hang out
Okay,
and annoy people in the neighborhood until I guess it's time for them to go back into their shelters. And I kind of understand that, because if I had to sit in a little room all day long or 24 hours, I'd probably want to get outside too. But they, you know, they're panhandling, they're involved in selling drugs, marijuana, which is now legal. So it's a big issue, and that's why we were hoping to get somebody on our committee to join our group that can speak to mental health services.
let me do this. I want you to put your number in private to Sophie.
Okay,
And then we're gonna move
We'll
that.
get back to you.
because This is such, not singular.
it's a big, yeah.
focus issue. And I want to make sure that we are able to move through. So send your number to Sophie Pauls, who's also at Thrive NYC, and we'll pick it up from there. Could we
Thank
take
you so
about-
much.
Oh, no, thank you. And I'm from Allen, so I'm not too,
Okay,
so I can understand exactly what you're saying. Sophie, let me get a couple of more questions and then we're going to introduce our panel.
Absolutely. So a question here. So how do you deal with trauma stemming from a loved one who is dealing with chronic illness and you are the caretaker?
You have to pace. Good question. You have to pace yourself. You have to, again, self-interrogation is really a key for so much of this, and you have to try to get help when you can. If you're asking about how do you take care of the loved one, back to you can't do it alone. You have to avail yourself to the resources that are out there, and you have phone numbers. And I know at the end of this, they're going to send you more information of places you can go to get help. So you can't tackle it alone. I mean, I've lived through that, so I can tell you this. That's not just book knowledge; it's what we've lived through. You cannot do it by yourself, and you have to monitor your health, your own health, your own sanity. You have to try to find people to allow you to take breaks from time to time, and to keep abreast of what's the latest available out there as far as support and resources.
Thank you, Dr. Ashley. And just reiterating what Dr. Ashley said, after this webinar, you'll receive quite a few resources that we encourage you to review. And then final question before we turn to the panel. What communities do you think are experiencing the most trauma, and what would be your approach to this?
Okay, so I'm always hesitant to have an oppression contest, and so because usually when that happens, there's no winners and only losers. However, if we strictly go by statistics and what we've the data clearly states that brown and black communities are have experiencing probably the most trauma, and that Asian communities, given all that's going on, is going through periods of very high anxiety. And so again, I'm always a little leery to do the oppression contests. However, if you just strictly look at the data, it is clear black, brown, Latinx, or if you want to say people of black, indigenous, people of color, are right now on the higher end of being exposed to traumatic events.
Thank you. And thank you all. We're going to continue. And we have 3 panelists. And what I really love about the construction of the panel is that they approach the same issue from different perspectives. And I will introduce them, and then they will, and I'm going to start with a question that stimulated a lot of conversation from the last webinar. I want you to first introduce yourself. I want you to talk about your platform, or how you, the filter that you view trauma from in terms of what you do. And then the question, just to get us going. And while I'm giving this question, I'm looking forward to getting questions from you in all of the boxes that's out there. And students, this is a time to shine. This is a time to shine. That's just a little hint. All right. How would you convince someone who needs help, and oftentimes within not just the faith community, but the faith community has its own je ne sais quoi. How would you convince someone, or what would you say to help move someone to get help? And that may be therapeutic help, that may be someone that needs help as a caretaker, the whole aspect of getting help. So it's who you are, how you approach this subject, that question, just to start us off. And I'm going to ask Chandra if you would start out.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Dr. Travis, excuse me.
It's okay, it's okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here and share my expertise. My name is Chandra Llewellyn, and I'm a board certified coach, and I work a lot with faith communities, particularly in communities of color. My original career path was through family counseling in Harlem, and many people were forced to come to services. And so people never viewed any sort of therapeutic intervention as being something that was positive. And also, as our speaker said earlier, that oftentimes it's the pathologizing of situations that turn people off. And those of us who have a therapeutic background, a psychology background, the minute you tell people, in certain communities, that you have this background, people stretch away from you because they feel like they're being analyzed or criticized and so forth. So one of the things that I've switched my professional focus into coaching, because it is a present and forward look at how we solve problems by looking at our strengths. And so it's not therapeutic in a sense, in a clinical way, though it is developmental, and it leads people, it moves people for surviving and going into a position of thriving. It's short term compared to therapy. And oftentimes, if you say, this is a person who's not going to be judging you, who's not attached to anything that you work on or with, who's not going to tell your business out in the street, and that there's not going to be some label put on you. If the person has a relatively low, what I would call a low grade issue, then it is a very productive path into getting us into a state of mental wellness. Also, if there is what coaches are also trained to do is to identify mental health issues. And oftentimes we work along with therapists of all stripes, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, et cetera, to support clients who actually do need it. So sometimes it works where we could say this is a problem that we've identified that's beyond the scope of coaching. And so we will work in tandem if you like, or recommend you to therapy. And or therapists might say this person's doing pretty well, so they can get out of that, and we'd like just to have some sort of continual support that is not as intervention laden as it had been in therapy. So coaching is it's like a bridge to reduce, help people reduce the impact of stress and trauma, or to help people get through trauma along with other kinds of mental health services.
All right, thank you, thank you. I'm gonna move over to my good friend and buddy, Pastor Ramos. Would you feel, oh yeah, you're unmuted. Can you respond from your vantage point?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm a pastor, and but I'm also a social worker, and I come from the field. I was a hospice chaplain for 5 years, and like Dr. Chandrell, that I also coach. I coach pastors. At one time, I worked during the with the Division of AIDS Services during the AIDS pandemic, and now I'm dealing with this pandemic. To your question, it's a very challenging when you're dealing with someone who perhaps is very reluctant to access services, and there's a whole history to that. And oftentimes people are afraid of institutional power because they've been either abused by institutional power. And so my first take is to try to gain confidence, trust. There's a saying that says people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So I first will try to express, my care for them, and to build trust with that person. And then in lieu of that is try to do some kind of assessment to see where would be appropriate to send this person. However, in the midst of that, sometimes, again, this has to do with how much time you have available to you with regards to each case. It's very particular. But what happens is that there has been, sometimes you need to educate people. Like in my context, I work with Latino community, and Latinos oftentimes feel that the psychological field is a testament to you having a mental, that you're crazy. There's a saying, psico loco, that you're crazy. To go to a psychologist is inherently saying that you have mental problems. So I have to conduct sort of like an educational path by which I can share the virtue and the importance of trained professionals in the emotional and psychological field. And then when I begin to tell them how much of a privilege it is and how costly having a therapist, being able to visit them, they all of a sudden the lights go on and say, wow, this would be a very good thing if I'm with a person who knows how to ask the right questions, who can sojourn with me in a process of healing. And then when that opens up, I could begin to refer them to an appropriate authority.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Rich, are you there? Did you have to step away? I'm going to move over to you, Dr. Ashley, and just give the seed of how you talk to someone about seeking help.
Okay, let me just defer to Dr. Rich since he's back on, and I'll answer after him.
All right. Dr. Rich?
Yes, I'm here. First, let me just say much thanks to those that are here, especially on this rainy day in New York, and sacrificing your time. And I would be remiss if I did not recognize the awesome scholars from LIU Brooklyn. I'm really excited that they're all here.
Raise your hand, scholars from Brooklyn. Let me see who you are.
LIU Brooklyn, yeah.
There you go, LIU in the hizzy.
Yeah, yeah, they're awesome. They're awesome. And many of these students, and I call them scholars because that's what they are. They're thought leaders. Many are graduating in a few weeks. And my colleagues from NACSW here as well. And so I'm so happy, Dr. Hoard and Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown is the president of our board. And so, and he's also a chair of social work department. I think it's Eastern, that's in Philadelphia, but he's a New Orleans guy. So, and a man of faith as well. And so is Dr. Hoyt. So Dr. Hoyt Oliver. So I'm so happy to just be in the midst of these scholars and colleagues. So in my role as an associate professor at LIU Brooklyn, I have the awesome task to train emerging scholars that will go on to sit for their licensure exams in the field of social work. In terms of a research area that's near and dear to me is this idea of how we use spiritual coping as a means to deal with mental health and health concerns and disparities therein, and specifically among African-American and African-American males. And so I shared this last week and I'll share it again today. This is a new group of, in terms of audience. There's a book by Dr. Waldo E. Johnson, who's a social worker. And this book really focuses on African-Americans and their mental health. And so when we think about African-Americans, this idea of men not crying, internalizing the pain and the hurt. And I think that's an area that I would start in understanding the barriers that do exist and working to help a client, a person to see that therapeutic services are available to all. And how we get there is allowing that individual to be the owner and the operator of that issue and not to take on the role of being the expert because of licensure, because of degrees, PhD, PsyD, the Ds go on and on and on. I think it's important that we build rapport and we embrace something we teach in social work called active listening. And so that's the way that I have worked with individuals that have presented with a multitude of concerns, whether it be in a faith-based community or just simply citizens of a community at large. And I think that is really important, especially when we think about men of color.
Thank you, and thank you. And Dr. Ashley.
So in the psychoanalytic world, we call it building an alliance. It's the same concept. How do you build trust? How do you connect with another person? And as my colleagues have said so eloquently, clearly, if I begin to pathologize you, you're going to walk away unless you're mandated by the courts to be there. So as my colleagues have said, this is just one human being talking to another human being. And back to what Dr. Phyllis Harrison Ross said, there's nothing wrong with you. What has happened to you is wrong. Hey, let's just talk about it. And let's try to sort out and find some meaning and attach meaning to it and figure out where do we go from here.
I like that soft approach. I met Dr. Ross. I did a retreat for the Association of Black Psychiatrists.
Okay, yeah.
And I met her was on a cruise after. I think the language that we use is real important. And getting help, if no one would think that it was off to suggest taking your car that won't start or getting it to a mechanic, getting it to someone that has the skill. It has always been, I've been a joke in my family when I show up to someone's house with tools, because they know I don't know how to fix. If it's not fixed by a screwdriver, we in trouble. Sometimes we need to find folk who know how to use a full gamut of tools. Mm-hmm. Just saying. Mm-hmm. So, are there any questions to the panel that are in the chat feature?
No, there are not.
May I jump in for a little bit, please?
Please.
I am, Dr. Ashley and I come from the same neighborhood. I grew up in the projects in Harlem, and I remember the level of violence that was there. Mm-hmm. I remember family members of classmates dying, kids riding in the elevators and being strangled, children being raped. Mm-hmm. And there was nobody there during my generation to really say that this was harsh. How do you feel about it? We didn't say anything. And I think part of that not saying anything has become part of the genetics of our dealing with mental health issues now. And part of our work about dealing with mental health is to start doing preventative education and start teaching children from a very young age and intervening when there is crises, and not putting children front and center with the drama of the trauma. And if we can begin to recognize that we have to unlearn some of the behavior that perpetuates a traumatic, so we've normalized trauma and think it's nothing, but in fact, it has become very damaging. And so I would also, I'm a big preventative person, and I would really start with how do we educate our children around mental wellness and being cared for during times of trauma.
Well said. Well said. I'm going to open the mic up to one or two students. This is a great opportunity. We have I'm a teacher now and a youth developer. We have a great opportunity for you to interact with people who've been around. And so take this opportunity. If you have a question or even a comment, please feel free to take yourself off mute and ask your question.
I'm on LIU Scholars, don't let me down.
I did have a question for Dr. Ashley. As a psychoanalyst and also like a man of faith, did you ever find any kind of competition or just clash between the two topics? And if so, like how were you able to face that? And also kind of like explain it to others around you who may have seen the same kind of clashes?
That's a very, very good question. And that's something I wrestled with. So thank you. So I hope the professor recognizes the question and the intensity of it. In my early going, I struggled only because my supervisors were more Freudian in a bad sense than the reality of Freud himself. And so they would push this notion of how can you be a pastor and a psychoanalyst and choose one. And I just kept pushing back. I didn't have the documentation, but just something about that said, no, there has to be a way that being a psychoanalyst and a pastor of brown, black folks in Harlem, Jersey City, you name it, can go together. After I graduated and I did research on my own, I found out that Freud had free clinics and that he wasn't, some of the stuff that I learned I had to unlearn, and that there is a natural melding, if you will, of psychoanalytic principles and being a pastor. If you strip away all the other stuff, hey, you look at, I analyze dreams. I know I understand where I am, but let's be honest, black folks deal with dreams. That's all I'm going to say. And if I say hymn number 359, certain people will play hymn number 359. And because I dreamt about that. And so, I mean, dealing with the unconscious, dealing with resistances, etc. I mean, it's part of what I do as a pastor. I mean, you have bad church meeting from hell, right? You're dealing with resistance. You have people that do things that are unconscious as to what they're doing. Transferences and countertransference. I mean, all of those terms are not just academic terms. You can use them in real life to your advantage. You have to be careful not to misuse them, and that's always something I struggle with. That I don't misuse what I know and use it in a way that's manipulative, because that can happen. I hope my congregation would say you've not done that, but I'm always aware that's a possibility.
Is there another?
Hi, my name is Kim, and I'm currently in stress management class with Dr. Rich. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Hi. And so I would like to know, I have a question, please, for the Reverend, please. How is this information of learning about others help you better understand people and their stories, or communities and their stories of needing or wanting your help?
Now, the two of us that are pastors, so I'm going to defer to my colleague first if he'd like to answer.
I apologize.
That's okay. It's okay. That's all right.
So let me, is that referring to me? Can you reframe the question? So how does the nature of,
Understanding each person's story, because each person will have a different story, correct?
yes, yes.
So how your better understanding would help you to assess them or.
Wow, thank you for that question. That is a wonderful question. And there is a whole lot of literature on narrative psychology and narrative theology, and the Bible is a book of stories. It is. So then, by listening, as Dr. Ashley mentioned about deep listening, it is both a method and an embodied way that we could both demonstrate love and listen to a person's individual story, their struggles. What were the high points? What were the low points? In fact, as a hospice chaplain, one of the things that I would do when I would meet with people who were on a deathbed, who are on their way out, is to conduct life review. And a life review basically is tell me your story. Tell me, what were your aspirations? Tell me your highs, tell me your lows. And by doing so, you are being invited into the sacred territory of the soul. And so then for example, as a minister and being both a clinician of sort, I had to go to clinical pastoral education, which is known as CPE. And there we basically learn how to do this deep dive into listening, how to acknowledge someone's pain, how to listen and not to how to be silent when people are sharing. And I think that that craft of being able to truly be present with someone is really a gift that you can give to someone. There's a book I believe that says listening is an act of love. Listening is an act of love. So being there present, listening deeply, acknowledging people's particularity and loving on them is a wonderful method to dignify and embrace someone. I'm hoping that I'm answering your question, and please let me know if there's another layer.
Yes, you did a great job. Thank you. Yes, you did a great job. Thank you.
Can I call you Kim? Is that?
Yes, of course.
Okay, well, Kim, to add to what Pastor said, ministry, as in any other profession, is always about relationships. That's the foundational piece. It's always about relationships. And there are different ways to build relationships within the congregation, if you will, within our own other professional workplace, wherever that may be. One of the ways, as Pastor just said, in building relationships is hearing the stories that people have to share. So even in the work of psychoanalysis, I want to hear and love to hear people's stories. As a pastor, as a professor, I love and want to hear people's stories. There are 5 stories that I think help us to get at the heart of what people are. Stories of searching, stories of suffering, stories of survival. There are stories of strength, and there are stories where we try to understand our identity. And as you share those stories, so for example, if you were in my class and that I'm teaching on Saturday, one of the questions I'm going to ask is, what were the stories in your upbringing around race and racism? And you learn a lot about people through those stories. Those stories are powerful, and they help us to get deeper into people. I think that being very transparent, I would say to my faculty when I was the dean at the seminary, that if I mess up the Bible, half the folks will know I messed it up. But if I mess up relationships, they march my butt to the door.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Llewellyn, you want to add something on the story?
So I'm going to pivot a little bit. In my work as a coach, I deal with healing professionals and particularly faith-based professionals, but for this audience also, your social workers. And it's really important that people understand that you are human before you are any professional that you are. And just as you bleed and suffer and have anguish and have unresolved fears or have struggles, that you are not exempt, and that when you do need to be in a position of self-care, it is your obligation to do so for yourself, because you will not be good as you can be for others. And somehow our professions carry a bit of guilt to it. Oh, so many people have needs and there's so much going on and they have this and they have that. They will always have many things, but you only have one life, and you have to use your time where you are best able to care for self in the context of caring for others. And it's something that's overlooked because of the passion of caring for a crises and issue of people, but you have to be passionate about your own well-being.
And if I could just add, because you just triggered a thought, there's a book that I have found very helpful to your point, The Wounded Storyteller. It's written by a psychiatrist. I don't remember the name of the psychiatrist, but I remember the book. It's The Wounded Storyteller, and it speaks to the very thing that you just said.
I'm going to just piggyback a little bit. So in my work, I'll just talk a little bit about my work with faith leaders. I am currently conducting a study through my company around how faith leaders are managing their self-care during the pandemic and other crises. And ironically, I ask questions about, is this your only job? No, I have other jobs to sustain my congregation, and particularly in communities that are poor with an elderly population, there's higher needs for care, and there's less resources to be able to stabilize the life of a pastor or a minister. And so oftentimes I have one person I know right now is working 4 jobs and dealing with a major health crisis. Also, people believe that people like pastors or ministers are born with wings on their back and golden slippers and nothing, they can transcend anything to help you. But that's not the case. And I think part of the work is teaching people how to help to work with you. A lot of the pandemic issues, it's very difficult to see pastors having to deal with funerals and stuff like that when they too and their families have people suffering from COVID or have died or may have it themselves. So it's all these types of things. And I think that to remain human and professional is so critical. And I can't emphasize that enough.
I'm going to take what you just said on your pivot, Dr. Llewellyn, and we started off talking before we opened up the room about first responders. When I say first responders in the community of faith I'm talking about right now, are burnt out. The hits keep on coming. Psalms 121 talks about looking to the hills from whence cometh your help. Suppose you look at the hill, up in the hills, and all you see is chaos heading nowhere, more problems dropping out of nowhere. The context for help, serial grieving, all of the things that are happening right now. I'm going to ask each one of you to frame just a short soliloquy, if you will. If you had one gift that you could give to someone that may be burnt out or burning out or about to give up, you can go through a story, you can go through an intervention, you can go through something that you have tried. Why don't you offer that right now? Because there are some folk, even our students, are working, burning the candles at both ends, trying to keep up with a force that will not back out.
If I could go first, I'd appreciate it. This is Telvis. So what I think about is the two-factor theory, which is what I use in many of my research studies. And this work is by Dr. Frederick Hertzberg. And the two factors are intrinsic and extrinsic factors, motivation and hygiene factors. What are those factors, if you will, if you're going through a tough time, the pandemic, the loss of life, loss of work, loss of financial wealth or stability, whatever that may mean for an individual. my thought, and I've shared this quite often, even in my classes, we do what we call a check-in now, because I think that's important. Where are you? What's brought you to this place? And in short order, in Latin, that's movere, to move. What is it that motivates you each day? And hang your hat on what got you here. Although you may have forgotten why you're here, you may have lost your way. As you said, what we find in Psalms 121:1, the hill may not look like a molehill or a valley, but understanding that what you thought was there before may just be different in terms of your lens, but it's still there. So finding that place of solace to say, what brought me here? What got me out of the bed this morning? What motivates me? It may be the children. It may be a financial, it may be a career, it may be a faith-based goal. And stand fast and be unmovable, and knowing that you are valued and that things do come. Trouble does not last always, and be motivated by what got you to where you are now, and allow that to allow you to move forward. That would be my antecedent to share with others.
Thank you so much, Doc. Somebody else.
My aunt Eloise, who grew up in a place called Watley, Georgia with my dad, but lived in Brooklyn until she moved out to LA. I called her over the weekend and said, Auntie, I'm just exhausted. I am worn out. And she asked me to enumerate the reasons why. And she put me on FaceTime and said, look me in the eye. My 93-year-old aunt said, baby, we got too much to do for you to be worn out. Figure it out. We got too many things that have to be done, and God gave you too many gifts to talk about being tired. Then she put my 97-year-old cousin on the phone and said, I'm sorry, I missed the part when Jackie Robinson said he was tired and worn out and couldn't go on. And in my world, when the elders speak, you listen. And I listened, and I thought about it, and I got a second wind, if you will. And in getting a second wind, I thought about the things that sustained me over my lifetime when things got heavy and things were hard and difficult to deal with. And they were creativity, looking at it through fresh eyes, not repeating the same patterns, but looking at it differently. So being unpredictable by being creative, having a sense of competence, knowing what I don't know, and what I don't know, what I need to know, finding out who knows, who can be helpful in that, having compassion, not only for myself, but for others, and recognizing other people are also struggling and going through at the same time, and character. It's gut check time. It's character building. It's time to really look and say, so what are you made out of? Are you really tired? Are you going to give up? Or can you find that second win and keep pushing through?
Thank you. I want to use a metaphor, and I'll go to our panelists, other panelists. I work with a number of people who are engaged in social action, who are in the front line, if you will, social workers, people who take care of other people, and pastors. And I tell them that a car has a feature. When you're running out of fuel, you'll either get a beep or a blinking light. If you paid a lot of money for this car, you don't call it a car, it's a fine riding automobile. It may talk to you. It may say, Willard, you're running out of fuel. You should pull into a gas station. But think about your soul tank. Your soul tank does not come with that feature. Your soul tank is where the energy is that powers willpower. Your soul tank is where that force is that kindles hope, that is that light inside of you. We live in a time where we now have unauthorized deductions from our soul tank. That the part that you talked about in terms of maybe controlling what kind of news you're looking at. There are so many ways now for someone to make an unauthorized withdrawal from you. that you have no capacity to defend yourself against. And after a while, that energy just is not there. Of course, rest care is real important. I just wanted to throw that out there to say, watch out for withdrawals, for demands that pull energy out of you. And that you can say no to, that you can find a way. So I'm gonna go up to Chandra.
Okay, so I would have a pocket full of words that you would use and they would land on the receiver with active compassion. So the first word is no. People ask you to do a lot of stuff. You don't have to do everything. So being able to say no. The second group of words would be wait, give me a minute. So that you can compose yourself, collect yourself, and center yourself in order to be responsive, but also do a check-in with yourself. And the third is yes, thank you. Oftentimes people who are very capable do everything, but other people can do or are willing to help or will do something for you that you may, oh no, I don't want, don't do it, no, I don't need that. When in truth, we're just saying it out of custom, but not saying it out of real need. So being able to say, yes, thank you, I'll take it. So those would be my magic things that I would, magic words that I hope land lovelily into the listener and the asker.
Well, thank you. David?
Sure, thank you. Pastors are exhausted and they're dealing with compound grief. I have a friend of mine who has had 15 pandemic deaths in his congregation, and then his church burned down. Tomorrow, I have to conduct a funeral for one of my members' sons who committed suicide on his daughter's birthday. This is the type of tragedy that we have to deal with. And there's no escaping that. I work with an organization that works with pastors, and we're seeing them. They're leaving the ministry. They're leaving New York. A lot, some of them. So there is a definite crisis. I have a friend who's a military chaplain, and he was stationed in Iraq, and this is what he told me. He said, "Listen, I don't go on the field, quote unquote, but." So the military soldiers, when someone gets shot or killed, they see that incident. But I'm stationed at the hospital. So all of the deaths that occur get flown into the hospital, and I get exposed to all of that death. And a pastor oftentimes is dealing with his own grief and loss, but also to compound that with all of his neighborhood, his congregation. So it's really, really difficult. And what makes this even more problematic? What makes this more problematic is that ministers sometimes are complicit in their own dehumanization. And I'll tell you why. Because what happens is they buy into this myth that the pastor, he or she is the superhuman person and they have all the answers and all that. And it feels good, but what it does is dehumanizes us. Because you know what? We do get sad, we get tired, we get angry. And my gift, if I were to give one to someone, is be kind to yourself. We're so good at giving. And sometimes it's very, very difficult for us to be kind to ourselves. So embrace yourself, embrace your limitations, embrace your frailty, embrace your failure, embrace it. And it's okay. We all have the opportunity to do that because we're human. Embrace your humanity, be kind to yourself, because we got to be in it for the long haul. God bless you all.
Love this panel. Well, we're moving into our last 8 minutes, and I'm going to save some time for Susan Herman to come back. I think, David, you made a point that our May 6th is our final webinar, and it will be on vicarious trauma. So Dr. Kim Anderson, even though you've been here twice, and I've seen you, don't think Uncle Fonzo has not seen you. This workshop on vicarious trauma is going to focus on the impact of trauma on those who help people who are traumatized. And it is possible to think that because you're not going through this, it still has that it won't impact you, but it does.
It does.
And how are ways that it, we're going to shine a light on vicarious trauma.
Mhm.
And to me, it is the natural point of where we get off the trauma train to understand the full dimensions of what is going on. So that is May 6th, and I believe that is at 12 o'clock. There will be a link. Susan will talk more about that. So what I'd like to do right now is go into the lightning round. The lightning round allows you 1 minute, presenters, didactic leader, to say something that's in your heart, in your spirit, in your mind, or all three places that you feel could be helpful given the construct of what we've been talking about. And I won't pick a person to start, but I'll start. Well, I said I won't, and now I'm doing it. Blame it on the pandemic. Please.
I would
Dr.
like
Rich.
to just, I'm sorry,
Oh, go on, brother.
real quick. I resonate with what Dr. Ashley shared. Don't do this alone. I think that leadership is isolating, and it could be very lonely, and it could be very thankless. So please don't do it alone. Find a tribe, your people, your friends, loved ones, who are your cheerleaders, people who love you, and who you can let your hair down. There are no masks. Find that, because they are essential, and they are life-giving.
Mm, mm, mm. And find folk that'll take you just as you are, that are not looking for you to even have to have a formalized way of asking for help. Sometimes, and please excuse the term, sometimes some of those snotty-nosed pleas, you can't worry about how you look in terms of being in need. I'm talking to somebody in one of these boxes here.
Mhm.
I'm feeling it. When I looked over to one way, I felt some energy. So please know, there is no right way to ask for help. There's better ways, but there's no right way. I'm moving on down. I took 20 seconds of your lightning round talk there, son. Somebody else, before I turn it over.
I want to say quickly, and I don't need the whole minute, and it echoes the sentiment of what's being said. It is okay to allow the external to rise to the level of your external, meaning what you're feeling on the outside, even before you get that professional help, is to express it. It is okay to cry. It is okay to go outside and just yell. Turn that shower into your own therapeutic space if you need to. There's a student here, I won't call that person's name, that said to me a few weeks ago that going to the bathroom became this place to get away from, say, from the kids or from the television. So find that place of solace for yourself and start to express what you're feeling internally, because that's where it starts, is when you're able to identify that there's a challenge, there's a need. And when you allow it to fester internally, it can combust. But when you allow it to then become externalized, a place of peace and freedom and release that will make you better, not just for yourself, but for those that are around you. So release, 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 and don't make excuses for your release.
Like that. Who's next? Yeah.
I would say two things. One is to laugh. I find that one of the best therapies is some good stand-up comedy, or whatever makes you fall over or laugh. So I think that laughter has a therapeutic effect on the body. It also releases tension, and it also focuses away from a particular dynamic, and it doesn't cost you anything. So that would be like the fun thing to do. And the second thing is to Find a non-judgmental space, person, and institution that you can go to, because sometimes your friends aren't, they love you, but they can't, they'll hold the story. You know, we want to tell our stories, but stories have an interesting half-life. And so being able to find the right spot where you can just let it rip and you don't have to worry about any repercussions or anybody else hearing it or feeling that you're less than what they expected you to be. So safe space for telling your story and feeling safe in its delivery.
Dr. Ashley?
Amen to everything that my colleagues said. I would just end it by saying it's okay to not be okay, but don't stay in that space. Get some help.
Well, thank you. And I thank all of the panelists and that thought it not robbery to come out to share. To you who are on the front lines, the multiple front lines for the students, we're all living through something that we never thought even conceive of. And its impact is not just for now. It's not just for the shelf life of a vaccine, that we're seeing something. So I am so happy to see scholars who are applying and learning and interacting. We talked about a whole village to raise a child. What will it take to raise a village that is being inundated? So thank you, young people. I'm hoping that Dr. Rich invites me in. Dr. Brown, I have a friend that, Andrea Hargett, Dr. Hargett, I believe she's at Eastern. I'm gonna tell her I saw you. So with that said, as a point guard, I'm gonna do a bounce pass. I'm gonna do a to Susan Herman. Oh, look at her, she caught it. Look at you, girl. To Susan Herman, who I should say, I didn't get a chance to say anything about her. I've known Susan for over, I'd say 30 years. We've worked together on a number of different initiatives. When she calls me, I always know it's going to be good, it's going to be interesting, and it's going to have the possibility of transforming spaces, places, and people. So with that, my sister, the light is on you.
Well, thank you, my brother. Let me say, we've known each other over 30 years, but it's since childhood. I mean, we're both in our early 30s and we were babies together.
Kindergarten.
Kindergarten.
We shared Oreo sandwich cookies.
Yeah, something like that.
So see, laughter is good for the heart.
The heart and the soul. And every time I'm with you, Alfonso Wyatt, I learn something. So whether I'm in the room with you personally or in the room with you on Zoom, I love it. And thank you for gathering all of us. Thank you, panelists, for joining us today. I think for me, I listen to these discussions trying to think if there are either themes or particular moments that stand out to me. And I would say today there were 3 moments that I thought were really important, and I'm paraphrasing, so stay with me here. But one moment was that when we're working with individuals, it is about, not that there's anything wrong with the individual, but it's about what happened to the individual and paying attention to the individual. Individual work is really important, and faith leaders work with individuals all the time. It is also true, and this is the second point, that faith leaders are responsible for communities. And one of the most healing things that can benefit someone is if they have a sense of belonging to a community. We all need each other, and we need to feel that we belong to a community. So it's not just about individual work, it's about community work. And the third moment that I thought was really important was, to me, it was evident throughout this that there is an absolutely unconflicted connection between your faith work and your mental health care work. If I said to you, someone who is engaged in deep listening, just sitting with people and being truly present, I'm not sure you would know if I was describing a faith leader or a mental health care practitioner. So you are all engaged in this good work. And to me, this was a beautiful conversation. I'm so glad that I was able to be a part of it. Before we close, I do want to emphasize that there's an enormous amount of mental health support available in New York City. And if you or someone you know is experiencing some mental health challenge, I really hope that you will learn about the resources that are available. Right now, if you go on the Thrive NYC website, there's a guide to how to access support while we are at home during the pandemic. But you can certainly always go and follow us on Twitter and hear about our updates. You can go to NYC Well and look directly for resources in your community for yourself or for someone that you care about. And as you've heard, following this event, you will get some resources. You'll get a toolkit for faith leaders, and you'll get trauma resource guide, which we hope will be helpful to you. And of course, students, we will send it to you as well. Everyone who is registered will get all of this material. So thank you again for sharing your time with us today. We hope to see you at our webinar on May 6th, which will focus on vicarious trauma and how it affects faith leaders in New York City. Really, how do you think about this? You say to yourself, what's happening to faith leaders during this traumatic time? What's happening to the faith leaders themselves? And what can you do about it? How can you help yourself and how can you help each other? Because there's so much connection between you. We hope we'll provide interesting resources for you. Thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you soon. You'll hear from us soon, and we hope to hear from you if you have suggestions or issues that you'd like to bring to our attention. Thank you again.
Thank you. I'm going to put up a nice little emoji here, just so you know how I feel. And if you want to hit that button, if you've never hit that button down there, it does marvelous things. Go on and hit that button. Put something up there that speaks to what you're feeling. Ah, yes, it don't cost money. We don't have to get an RFP. Come on and put it up. You don't have to put that same one. I'm going to put a different one up there. Oh, yes, laughing through my pain. There you go. There you go. Ooh. Gambler, you got a little party going on in your little booth. Oh, yes, bro.